Hello, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about all of the books that I read in July. So July was an interesting month. I went on a trip for a week with my family and I also got a puppy. So you might have seen her in my last video, but if you didn't, this is Miss Indy. She is 5 months old and she's a Havanese, and she came home with me about a week ago. And she is my pride and joy, but she's also not doing great with potty training. But July was a very average month for me as far as reading goes. I had a lot of 3 stars. No 5 stars, but also no 1 stars, so I guess that's good. I read a total of 9 books in July, and 2 of them I read completely on audiobook, so I don't have them here to show you. But let's work our way up. So let's start with the 2 books that I gave 2 stars. Starting with my least favorite book of the month, which was She Started It by Sean Gilbert. This is a book of the month book from June of this year, and this is about some girls who were friends in high school and they bullied this one girl in their class. And years later, they are all invited to the bachelorette party of this girl that they were not very nice to in college. And they all decide to go because it's a free trip to the Bahamas. And this was exactly like you'd expect. It didn't do anything different than what you would expect it to do. I guessed everything that happened. It was basically a bunch of girls that just were petty and privileged and obsessed with like social media and their appearance, and it just really did not work for me. But I should have known that because wedding thrillers and remote island thrillers don't really work for me. So I should have known this. I kind of fell into the hype with this one, and I did read this for Catch-Up-a-thon for the prompt of a book that was hyped, I think. Next we have The Getaway Girls by D. McDonald, and I read this for the BookTube Besties virtual reading retreat weekend that I participated in this month. It was so much fun, and this was the buddy read because it was a road trip travel theme. And I kind of knew this wasn't going to be a favorite for me, but it's basically just like general women's fiction chick lit. These 4 older women who decide to go on a road trip across Europe. And I read this on my Kindle, and it very much was what you'd expect. Very surface level, not a whole lot of character development. The things that the characters did seemed very, I don't know, out of character of what I think a retired woman would do. They made some pretty outlandish decisions that didn't make a lot of sense. There was some weird subplots, and it just, overall, it didn't work for me. I almost DNF'd it, but I wanted to finish so that I could participate in the discussion. So I finished it, but I already have forgotten so many details about it. So those were the 2-star books. Let's move on to the 3-star books that I read this month. Starting with Hello Transcriber by Hannah Morrissey. This I decided to buddy read with my friend Elizabeth, and I'd had it on my shelf because she really loved it. And this is about a woman who is a police transcriber in a small town. And this small town has a lot of drug violence. It also has a lot of people that commit suicide by jumping off of a bridge. Y'all right? I'm not sure if that was a cough or a sneeze. And so this police transcriber decides to kind of get together with this young policeman to solve this case of this man who is giving people drugs that is killing them. Or so you think that's what's happening. And it had this weird romance element to it, and I don't know, it just overall didn't really work for me. It wasn't a bad book, but I don't know that I would recommend this to too many people. It was very dark, and just there was nothing at all happy that I can think of that happened in this book. And the character herself was a pretty gloomy, dark person, which I normally don't mind, but I don't know. I read it pretty quickly. It's pretty short, but yeah. I mean, I initially liked it a little bit more when I read it, but there is one thing in here that I really don't like in books. And so as I've thought about it more, I like it less and less. So that's Hello Transcriber. I don't know that I would read anything else by Hannah Morrissey. I don't know that I really liked the writing style either. Next we have Dark Corners by Megan Golden. I also read this for Catch-Up-a-thon for the Build Your Own Sunday Readathon. I vlogged my experience reading this book, and this is about the same podcaster from the book Night Swim. Definitely read this as a standalone though. You don't have to read the Night Swim, although I would say skip this and read the Night Swim instead. I loved the Night Swim. I gave it 5 stars, but this was a low 3. I think that part of the reason that I didn't vibe with this is because there's a lot of celebrity aspect to it, and I don't really like that. This book is also kind of hard to describe. So essentially, you have Rachel who does this podcast, and she's called down to Florida because there's a man serving time for murdering a young woman, and he doesn't get any visitors until this one famous influencer comes to visit him and speaks Rachel's name. They start talking about her, and so they bring Rachel down. The FBI is hoping that she can help them solve some of these unsolved cases that they've never been able to link to this guy. And then she decides to stay down there and kind of go undercover, like she's going to this influencer conference. But I felt like Megan Golden made influencers out to be these materialistic bimbos. Also, there's this like second timeline or this like subplot that she's doing her podcast on, and you're not really sure how it connects to the book at first. So I was kind of confused. I wasn't sure if it was like an article or the podcast or just a subplot. I don't know. Overall, this didn't really work for me. I was pretty disappointed because I've loved Megan Golden books in the past, but her last one, Stay Awake, was awful. So I don't know. To pick up her next one, I would have to be really intrigued by the premise. But this one I kind of went into blind because I just thought I liked Megan Golden's writing, and I do like her writing, but this one just didn't really work for me. Next, I listened to The Night Olivia Fell by Christina McDonald, and I also read this because of my friend Elizabeth. And this is very similar to if you've read Reconstructing Amelia by Kimberly McCreight. Essentially, you have a single mom and her daughter Amelia, and the single mom is called to the hospital because Amelia either fell or was pushed off of a bridge, and she is in a vegetative state. Except that they can't take her off of life support because she's pregnant. So her mom is trying to basically figure out what happened on the days leading up to Olivia's fall, and who the father of her baby is, and whether or not she was pushed or she jumped or she just fell. And this didn't really do anything that I wasn't expecting. I liked it when I initially finished. I feel like I had a lot of good conversations around motherhood and being a single mom, and how hard it can be to be a teenager, and how hard it can be to make decisions as a teenager. So I think that if you liked Reconstructing Amelia, then you would also like this as well. But if you've already read one, I don't think you need to necessarily pick up the others since they are extremely similar. My next 3-star is The Great Pretender by Susanna Cahalan, and this is the third book that I read for the Catch-Up-a-thon, Build Your Own Sunday Read-a-thon. And this is a nonfiction kind of psychology-esque book about a experiment in the 1970s where a doctor convinced a bunch of people to go undercover in asylums and mental hospitals in America to basically figure out what they mean by different diagnoses. So they took all of these neurotypical people and they put them in asylums, and after like a couple weeks when they were released, he studied what the doctor said they were diagnosed with, and most of them were diagnosed with schizophrenia and all sorts of other things. And this experiment pretty much blew the door wide open on asylums in America and the inhumane things that were going on. But this really changed the game on how we treat individuals with diagnoses in America and what that means and how we should be supporting them. So overall, I did enjoy this book. I learned a lot, but it was very dense. It was very dense. It was very heavy in the terms, in the terminology, in the science behind it, in the numbers, in the data. And I like that, but it was really hard to get through sometimes, and it took me a long time. So while I did learn a lot, and I definitely appreciate learning about this since I do work in the field of mental health, again, I don't really know who I would recommend this to, because you really have to be interested in that kind of niche part of psychology and not mind the very drab science, like textbook-y type of writing. So I don't know about the author's writing style. She sometimes would like throw in little things, I felt like almost personal biases, which I could honestly have done without. But overall, I think this was a good book and I'm glad I read it. Okay, and then we have our last 3-star book. This was a very average 3-star month, but my last one is The Ferryman by Justin Cronin, and this one is a chunker. It took me a very long time to read it. Oh look, I still have my bookmark. This is a bookmark that my friend Summer from the channel Seasons Readings made for me. But anyways, this is a sci-fi dystopian that I read because my friend Gwen has a podcast called Talk Bookish to Me, and there is a Patreon for that podcast, and we did a buddy read this summer. And I don't know what to say about this book. I enjoyed the first third of it. I really did. It's about this dystopian universe where there's no dreams and teenagers come over on this ferry and are given to parents to raise. And then you have this monitor, and when your monitor runs out, it means you're done living. You go back on the ferry and you go back to wherever it is the ferry goes, and you basically get almost reincarnated, and then you come back. So you live like multiple lives. And so you have this guy who is the ferryman, and that's his job, to escort the older individuals to the ferry and make sure that they kind of go out of this life and get there safely and are able to come back into a new life. And that was an interesting premise. And then it just got more and more bizarre. And then about 2/3 of the way through, it was like the weirdest fever dream. I was like, okay, this guy took Robitussin and went to sleep and had a dream and then wrote a book. Like, that must be what happened or something. It just got so weird and so bizarre. And then there were these little vignettes of different things, and I wasn't sure of the timeline. I wasn't sure of a lot of things. And then the sci-fi element came in at the very end, and then it kind of had one of those tropes that I don't really like, and I can't say anything about it because it's a huge spoiler. But we all had a discussion about this on Gwen's Patreon channel, and it was interesting. There was definitely some differences in opinions on this book, but it was a good discussion. But it was kind of fun because when I finished reading this book, I was like, I'm so confused. I have no idea what went on. And I had to like read some other reviews and try and figure out and read some spoilers to figure out, oh my gosh, what happened the last like 1/5 of this book. But even people that gave it 5 stars were still kind of confused. So we were all kind of confused together. So I really did enjoy the discussion, and I have good memories of talking about this book with all of the different patrons and everything. But it was a 3-star book, just because it just got too weird and it was just too long. This could have been shorter by like 200 pages. Okay, so now we are going to move on to my 2 4-star books of the month. The first being The Odds by Jeff Strand. And I read this because of Elizabeth from Reading Riley. She has a book club called the Midnight Society Book Club here on YouTube. And she read this book with my friends Jordan and Gwen and Jessie this month. So I wanted to make sure I read this to support them and join the discussion. So I will link the discussion down below so you can go back and watch it if you're interested. And this one was fun. It's short. It only took me a couple of hours to listen to it on audiobook, but essentially you have this guy who goes to Vegas for a work trip, and he has a little bit of a gambling problem, and he falls into the Vegas thing and he gambles away a bunch of money, and he walks out of the casino and he's just so distraught. He's like, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna tell my wife? She's gonna be so disappointed in me. I've lost all this money. And this guy stops him and says, hey, I have a way that you can win back some of this money. And he says it's basically like an odds game. And you have 99% odds of winning, but you have a 1% chance of losing. If you lose the game, they get to break your arm, essentially, in like a machine. And he considers it, but he really needs this money, so he does it and he wins because it's a 99% chance. Pretty straightforward game. And then the odds get lower and lower and lower, and the stakes get higher, and the money gets higher, and the game gets harder. After a few rounds of the game, he's like, nah, I'm done. And he goes home. And then the game kind of follows him, and he's forced to continue playing the game. And there's all of these rules, and it's very much Hunger Games meets Squid Games meets the Saw movies. It didn't go as gruesome as the Saw movies, which I kind of appreciated, but it was very similar to Squid Games in the game aspect and the kind of deadly need to play the game. And I thought that the character of the wife in the book was really cool, and I thought that the resolution was interesting. I wasn't a huge fan of the ending. I would have ended it a different way, but I did like the writing style. It reminded me of Stephen King without being super overly descriptive. It was like Stephen King if he was able to condense all of his thoughts. And so overall, I really liked this book. I only gave it 4 stars because some of the things got a little bit ridiculous at points and a little bit less believable. And then the ending I would have done differently. But overall, I think it's a really good one and I definitely recommend it. And then the last book we have to talk about, and my favorite of the month, is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. And this is the most recent Riley Sager. I've read all of his books, and my friend Jessie from the channel Reading with Jess has a book club on YouTube called the Sleep When I'm Dead book club, and she and Gwen discussed this on her channel this month. So I will also link that discussion down below. It was a really good discussion and it lasted like a really long time. Like it was almost 2 hours of talking about this book. So this is about Kit, and Kit is a caregiver. So instantly I was intrigued because I was a caregiver for individuals with disabilities for years. And so Kit had kind of a bad experience at her last job, and so now she's been given a second chance to take care of Lenora Hope. And Lenora Hope lives in this mansion on the edge of town, and she is notorious for murdering her parents and her sister, and very Lizzie Borden-esque. And it's set in the 80s, and it's very gothic mansion vibes, and there's very quirky characters that live in the mansion and work there. And so she's taking care of Lenora, and Lenora only has use of her fingers and her eyes essentially to communicate with people, and she communicates a lot through typing on a typewriter. And so she decides to tell Kit kind of what happened to her and what actually happened the night the murders took place. There was so many twists in this book. The big one I did see coming. A couple of the little ones I also saw coming. There was a couple that I didn't, but the reason that I gave this 4 stars instead of 5 is that by the end, there was just too many twists and too many just kind of outlandish things coming out of the woodwork. There was also too many characters. There was a couple characters that had such similar names or the same names. Like there was Rick and Ricky, and I just got confused, and I was like, are these the same person? Are they different people? Honestly, neither of their characters were really necessary. I felt like the ending was just kind of a cop-out. Like, you guys know I don't like a perfectly wrapped up ending. I don't think that an ending needs to be totally tied up with a bow and everything needs to be resolved and everybody lives happily ever after. And that's kind of what I feel like this did. And I wish that Riley Sager would have just gone there a little bit more with some of the angst there at the end and leaving us guessing with at least one aspect of the story. But overall, I do recommend this book, and this is my favorite of the month. Okay. That is all 9 books that I read in the month of July. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of these books and what did you think of them. Please hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel. And Indy and I will see you in our next video. Bye. Oh.